Hello, everyone. Good day to all of you. I hope all of you are safe and well. First things first, thank you very much for setting some time apart amidst your busy schedule and joining us for this event. Welcome to Cloud Virtual 2021. Now, in this session, we have two topics to discuss. The first topic will be about the role of identity and access management in securing the cloud. I will be handling the topic. And then my good friend and colleague Harish is on the line waiting to talk about cloud security. So we have two topics, okay? And just to honor your time, you spending your time with us, we will be picking three winners at the end of today's session, and then we'll be handing away gift vouchers to you, okay? Thank you very much for your participation once again. I would like to make a quick audio video check even before I move forward. So if you can hear me loud and clear, and if you can see the screen well, so please drop in a yes message. I kindly request you to make use of your chat box and then drop in a yes message. All right, I see a few yeses, lots of yeses. Fantastic. I take this as a green signal, and then let's move forward. All right. Now, the topic, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be the role of identity and access management in securing the cloud. And a quick introduction about myself. My name is Vivin Satyan. I've been working as a technology consultant in the Active Directory team of Manage Engine for almost 9 years now. And in case you need any resources related to Active Directory or Office 365 management, auditing, or you have any generic questions, please feel free to shoot an email to me or to my colleague Harish. We'd be more than happy to answer your questions. You can also make use of the chat box to, to shoot out your questions. We will be more than happy to help you out with the answers. All right. Now, I thought the way I have structured the session is I will be focusing on the core aspects of IAM and the evolution of IAM, Identity and Access Management, and its role in IT security. And I will be using an identity and access management offering from Manage Engine, AD360. That's the name of the product. So I will be using AD360 to demonstrate some of the capabilities of the tool relevant to identity and access management. Now, do not worry. Even if you're not using a solution from Manage Engine, you're using a different IAM solution already. That's perfectly fine. Please see whether the use cases or the action items that we are about to discuss in the session can be put to use in your tool. That's the whole idea, right? Now, when you talk about identity and access management in the beginning of the technology as such, or the process as such, it had two core functions. The first one being authentication and the second one being authorization, right? Now, authentication is the process of verifying who is who. Authorization is the process, in simple terms, authorization is what a user is allowed or what a user is restricted to once the digital authentication is a success, okay? So initially, identity and access management was all about these two functions. Now, over the years, we all know that identity and access management has evolved, right? It has branched down to at least 7 broad functions. Of course, there are other responsibilities as well, but I'm just here to talk about identity and access management from an identity standpoint. So talking about identity management, there are 7 broad functions, okay? You have onboarding, which is of course user onboarding, and then you have offboarding of users. When the users leave the organization or when there's a change in department, you'll have to offboard user from one department and onboard them off to the other department. And you have the authentication process, right? So you'll have to think about authentication and how secure is your password. And people are now talking about passwordless authentication. So which one to use, which one to adopt and all that. Multi-factor authentication, adaptive multi-factor authentication. And you'll also have to think about self-service to a certain extent, right? So you'll have to think about which aspect of self-service are you going to give to your users, okay? And then there is a very important and interesting aspect, which is delegation, right? Because when you talk about identity management, especially, right, it is not just about the administrator's task anymore. So you have your HR playing a role in identity and access management. You have your help desk technicians, your line managers playing some role or the other when it comes to IAM. So how are we going to delegate actions to other users in the infrastructure without actually delegating them control or authority. So the whole idea is to delegate an action, but not control or authority. Okay. Now, after talking about all these 6 functions, a very important function is still left out, which is analytics, right? Now, what does analytics have to do with identity and access management? Well, let's say you create a user, you delete a user, you modify a user, okay? Or you change licenses, or you're trying to clean up your Microsoft 365 infrastructure. You're trying to take account of the inactive users or the empty groups or whatever it is, okay? There has to be 2 types of analytics associated with IAM. One is general analytics, for example, like the licensing structure of a department, the expenditure and all that. The second analytics is risk-based analytics, okay? So who is having what permission or what level of access, or who deleted a user, who modified a privilege and all that. Now, all these 7 functions are related to IAM. Okay, that's the evolution of IAM. Now, the agenda for this session is going to be around those 7 functions that I just showed you, right? The first one is going to be about standardizing the process of user onboarding, because everything starts with onboarding, right? So we'll start with user onboarding, and we'll see some of the tips and tricks that we will have to follow when you are managing a hybrid infrastructure. I hope at least 60 to 70% of the users who have joined us today are already in a hybrid environment, which is you have your on-prem, and at the same time you have your cloud infrastructure, and you have user accounts residing in both. Okay, can I see a couple of yeses for that, if at all you are using a hybrid infrastructure? Right. Okay, few yeses. Oh, lots of yeses. So which means my guess was right. So at least 60 to 70% of you are using a hybrid setup. Okay. The second point that we will be talking about is it's not just about onboarding users. You'll also have to have a process in place while you offboard users as well, not just from your on-prem, but also in other platforms, including cloud technologies, right? The third part, as we talked about earlier, it's no longer about the administrators or just about the administrators. So you'll have to think about delegating tasks to other technicians. Now, technicians can be your HR, they can be line managers, they can be department heads, or they can be, let's say, IT technicians. Okay, so how are we going to delegate tasks instead of control or authority? Number 4, we then move on to authentication. After we talk about all kinds of onboarding and offboarding and delegating exercises, we then switch gears to the very important aspect of identity and access management, which is authentication, right? Now, how are we going to strike the right balance between user convenience and let's say credential security? So you as an administrator would want to have the right balance. You don't want to be too hard on your users by setting up a very complex password policy, and at the same time you don't want to be very easy about setting up a password policy, because that would eventually compromise your IT security. Okay, we know that that's the weakest link. Okay, and the 5th topic is how do you secure access to cloud applications, because we understand that in any given IT infrastructure nowadays you have at least 5 or 10 different applications, and especially cloud applications in use, and users use that almost day in and day out. So how are you going to secure access to cloud applications? By using adaptive MFA and secure single sign-on. So all these are the 5 topics that we will be discussing in the first session. Okay. Now, I told you earlier that when you talk about identity and access management, I will be using a solution from Manage Engine, which is AD360, that helps you do all this. Okay. However, this is not going to be a 100% product session. As I told you, the use cases that I'm about to discuss in this session can be put to use even if you're using a different product. Okay. Now, for those of you who are new to AD360, let me give you a quick introduction, because I think it is my responsibility to formally introduce a solution, give a quick introduction, and then talk about the solution and its various aspects. Okay. Now, AD360 is a single suite, an IAM suite from Manage Engine that has various modules. right? And you can pick and choose the modules that you are interested in. For example, the first module is all about Active Directory, Office 365, or Microsoft 365 Exchange management, okay? The second module is all about understanding who, what, when, and where. So the auditing module basically helps you audit your Windows servers, workstations, domain controllers, your file servers, EMC, NetApp. The third module is all about self-service. Okay? This is where an administrator has to take a call and strike the right balance between user convenience and password security. Okay? And this is where we'll talk about multi-factor authentication, securing your endpoints, and enabling secure single sign-on for your cloud applications, and a lot more. Now, the fourth aspect is for the fans of Exchange. Okay? I know that at least some of you might still be using an on-prem Exchange, or you have your Exchange online. Okay? Do we have any users using Exchange online or on-prem Exchange still? Okay? Any Exchange fans here? Oh, fantastic. Right, so we have a few uses for that too. So we have a dedicated module just for Exchange, for reporting, auditing, monitoring, and all that, not just for your on-prem, but also for Exchange Online. Okay, and if you are a 100% Microsoft 365 cloud shop, okay, in the sense you're not running a hybrid setup, you are 100% cloud, and you want a dedicated solution to you manage your Microsoft 365 that's on the cloud. And we have a dedicated piece for that. So AD360 has all of this in one single exe file. All right. Enough said about AD360. Let's jump right into our topics. The first function that I'd like to discuss with you is user onboarding. Okay. Now, when you talk about onboarding, we'll have to realize something, that we are talking about multi-platform onboarding. It's not about just creating one user in Active Directory and adding users to the right groups, giving them permissions and all that. Okay. Now you have to think about multiple technology platforms as organizations grow. Now we, from a Manage Engine standpoint, through AD360 offer a multi-platform onboarding layout, which I'll be showing to you in a short while. But before that, I'd like to make sure that whenever you think of onboarding users, be it an Active Directory, or you're trying to create an Exchange mailbox for a newly created user, or you're trying to create a Microsoft 365 account, map a E5 license and all that, you'll have to think about standardization. Okay, so the naming conventions of the user should be consistent, and there'll have to be segregations between admin accounts and regular accounts. And if you're talking about on-prem, if you're creating two users belonging to the same department, they should have similar group membership. So all this has to be documented, right? So documentation is a bit hard for all this, but even if you do not have a documentation in place, if you have a process in place, things become much more easier, right? So this helps you in avoiding data pollution. Now, what I mean by data pollution is, if you have inconsistent syntax, for example, the phone numbers of the users are in different formats, okay, there are naming truncations, and you do not have a naming format per department or for job roles. All this leads to data pollutions, because when you have 50 users, it's much easier to manage. But when you have 500 users, 5,000 users, or 50,000 users, okay, there definitely has to be a process in place, and the process should start from the creation stage, and it should move all the way to the deletion stage. Okay, so all three stages of user object lifecycle, be it in any technology platform, cloud or on-prem. And there are two ways of doing this. There's always a manual way of doing or bringing in standardization, a manual process. And if it is something that you do on a regular basis, you can also think about automating the process. Okay, now using the offering from Manage Engine, okay, we give you a multi-platform onboarding layout, which basically has three core functions that will help you onboard a user to multiple technology platforms, including cloud platforms. Okay, I'm sorry, cloud platforms. Let me introduce you to three core features of the template, and then move on to the next feature. Okay, so I am going to use my, this is a 2012 Mark II box, and I've installed AD360 on that box. So I'm going to quickly open up a template here. Okay, you might have noticed that this module is AD Manager Plus that I'm working with. This is again a part of 8360. So we have templates for every object that you want. It's not just for users. We have objects for, we have templates for groups, templates for creating computer accounts, templates for creating exchange mailboxes and all that, okay? Now, why do we introduce templates for every object creation, modification, or deletion? Because we really want to make sure that there is some sort of standardization in place when it comes to managing users in multiple platforms, okay? So I'm going to quickly open up a template that I created for this session, and I'm going to explain just 3 core features of a template. Okay, I've already created a template, and this template is going to be delegated to the HR. Okay, so we have I have 2 sample templates for you, one for the administrator and the other one for the HR. Okay, so let me explain the basic template for use so that you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, all right. The first feature is, as you can see, in the first look, you might have noticed something even before I talk about the features. You might have noticed that some of the fields are highlighted and certain fields are grayed out, okay? And not just the fields, even if you take a look at the tabs, some of the fields are the general field or the general tab is highlighted, but the other tabs are grayed out, okay? There's a reason behind this because this template is going to be delegated to HR. So I don't want the HR to be able to see everything that is in the template. So what I've done here is the first feature is enable drag and drop. Now using enable drag and drop, I have customized this layout in such a way that only the fields that are highlighted will be visible to the HR. So if the HR is going to use this template to onboard 5 users or 10 users belonging to different departments, the HR will only be able to see the fields that are highlighted here, not the ones that are grayed out. However, all these fields will be, all the values of these fields will be passed on to Active Directory, Exchange, Office 365, Sky for Business, you name it. Okay, so that's the benefit of enabling drag and drop. It's basically used for customizing the layout. Now, if you are an administrator and you're trying to create accounts across multiple technology platforms, now you need not use enable drag and drop because you're the administrator. You have the keys to your kingdom. But whenever you want this template to be delegated to the HR or the line manager or the department head or even the technician, you might want to restrict access to certain fields which you feel is sensitive. For example, if you go to the account tab, in the account tab, I don't want the HR to be able to know what the password is. Okay, I've typed the password already. I've added the user to the right groups, and this includes the one for Office 365. And I have all kinds of configuration here. So I've already defined what Exchange server should be used for mailbox creation, remote mailbox creation, and even Office 365. Okay, but I don't want the HR to be able to see all this. That's when I use enable drag and drop. Okay, so I can edit a field, rename a field, delete a field, or simply create a simple form with just 3 fields and then hand it over to the HR or the technician. Okay. Now the second feature that I'd like to discuss about is my favorite. Okay. Now I told you that this template is going to be handed over to the HR, and the HR will be able to see only the fields that are highlighted, right? For example, the first name is highlighted, the last name is highlighted, and the title is highlighted. Now, one question that you might ask me is, how can I create a user? Okay, if I'm logging in as the HR and I'm using this template, how can I create, let's say, a user account belonging to multiple departments? So let's say I create user A belonging to IT and user B belonging to marketing. Okay, so how can I use this one template and then create accounts in multiple departments? Okay, because there has to be a deciding factor somewhere. So that's when creation rules come into play. Okay, this is my favorite. I'll explain what these rules are. So when you open up creation rules, you basically key in a logic. You can add any number of rules as you want. Okay, so if you have 10 departments or 15 departments, you can create 15 different rules. Okay, so I have just created 3 rules for to make things a lot more easier to explain. Okay, now every rule works based on a condition. Let me explain the rule to you. Now, rule number 1 is for creating an IT admin account. Rule number 2 is for IT technician. Rule number 3 is for creating a server administrator account. Of course, you can add any number of rules. Now, when you expand rule number 1, every rule works based on a condition. And the condition is, in this case, if the HR is going to select the title as IT admin, let's say, then the IT admin should be created with the values that are predefined here by the administrator. Okay, so this is going to be the right description, the right licensing for Office 365. The user should be added to all these on-prem groups and all that. Okay, now the second rule is for IT technician. So if you expand the rule, so now the HR is going to select the title as IT technician. Okay, if it's IT technician, then I want certain other values set to be assigned to the user account. So based on the title that the HR is going to select while they create accounts, the values will be auto-populated. That's why this is my favorite, okay? And also the favorite of most of the administrators, provisioning accounts with the onboarding template that you see on the screen. Okay? This is feature number 2. And the third feature is copy user attributes, and that's self-explanatory, right? If you're trying to create a template for the IT department and you want to build this template really quick or in a uniform format, you can very well copy an IT user's property and then paste it on this layout, okay? You can pick and choose the attribute that you might want to copy. For example, I have this account called Alan Klein. Alan Klein belongs to the IT department. So I select Alan Klein's account, go to select attributes, right? And then what I do here is I pick and choose the attributes that I want to copy from Alan Klein's account and then have it pasted on this layout. So instead of me manually defining the fields one by one, I use the copy user attributes feature. Okay, I hope I have explained the 3 core features. So the enable drag and drop is used for customization. Creation rules is for creating multiple accounts belonging to multiple job roles and departments using one simple framework, which is the template. And copy user attributes is for copying properties from an already created user and then loading it onto the template. So it makes the process a lot more uniform. Okay, so no 2 users belonging to the same department have different properties. Okay, so that's the first feature that I wanted to discuss with you. Okay, the templates. Okay, so I see a lot of questions coming in. So please keep the questions coming. I'll make sure to answer or get back to you with an answer for all your questions after I'm done with the presentation. Okay. Now I told you that there are 2 ways of creating accounts. One is the manual way, and second is you can automate the process. Okay. So the AD Manager Plus module allows you to automate some of the routine tasks that you do day in and day out. Okay. Let me just stick to the onboarding part. So when you go to the automation tab of AD Manager Plus, let me quickly open up the tab for you. All right. Now, when you go to the automation tab, and the automation is not just for your Active Directory, it is also for your cloud platforms. Okay. So let's talk about automating user onboarding. Of course, you can automate a lot of other tasks as well, but for this example, let's just stick to onboarding. So what you do is you create a new automation, okay? And we have 4 categories of automation: user, computer, group, and contact. And for every category that you select here, you have sub-actions, okay, or subcategories. Okay? So for user automation, what I'm trying to automate is the process of user onboarding. So I go to create users. When you hit create users, the first thing that you'll have to do is you'll have to choose a template, okay? Are you trying to create multiple users using one template? If that's your requirement, yes. Or if you want the automation to be, let's say you want different automations for creation of objects in different departments, yes, you can create as many automations as you want and schedule them, schedule the execution time based on your requirement, okay? So let's say I'm trying to onboard users to the IT department, okay? Now you'll have to provide a source to the automation. The source can be a simple CSV file in your network share, or it can be directly from your SQL server. It can be an Oracle database, and we have all kinds of integrations that I'll be talking about, okay? And after defining the source in which you have the user information to onboard, you can then schedule this automation to run on any time interval that you want. daily, weekly, monthly, or even hourly basis. Okay. And once this automation crosses a specific stage, you might want to enable notifications so you get notified via a text message or an email, or even both. Okay. So we have notification templates for every automation that you schedule. So even when an automation fails or an automation completes execution, you have notification here. So this is how effectively you can automate the process of user onboarding. Okay. Let me repeat, I'm not just talking about Active Directory here, I'm also talking about Office 365, G Suite, and other platforms. Okay. So for Office 365, you can onboard users with or without licenses, depending on your requirement. Okay. And as I told you, everything works on a predefined condition. So if the department is IT, you want certain licenses to be assigned, you want the user to be in a certain group, and you want the process to be automated, yes, we will be able to do that for you. Okay. Now that we have completed the first task, let me talk about the second task, which is offboarding users. Okay. Now, offboarding includes a variety of things. It's not just about deleting users. Okay. Offboarding can be disabling users. Offboarding can be offboarding from one department and then onboarding users onto another department. Okay. It can mean multiple things. Now, offboarding can also mean cleanup in a certain sense, right? For example, it can also be to you can even offboard users, or you can even think about cleaning up your Office 365 or Active Directory infrastructure with certain parameters in place or certain conditions in place. Let's look at some of the common conditions. Okay, this is just specific for Active Directory. However, you can apply the same for your Office 365 as well. Users who have not logged in for more than 180 days and are still enabled. If you want to scan your infrastructure and find out such inactive accounts, yes, we'll be able to do that. Computers that have not authenticated for more than 8 months or 6 months or 12 months or whatever. Groups without any members, okay? I call them ghost groups. So you create temp group, test groups, and they have no members and they have not been used ever since the time of creation. You might want to find and purge those groups sequentially. At least isolate these groups from other groups, from your regular groups. Unused GPUs. Okay, so you might have created a GPU sometime in 2011 and you have not touched the GPU or used the GPU since then. You might want to discard the GPU. Okay, so finding this manually is going to be a bit of a task. You might want to think of a way by which you automate the process. Okay, now let me tell you something. Let me tell you a very important point here. Okay, now when I talk about onboarding or offboarding users, okay, it's not just about a single platform. Of course, it's about multiple platforms. And especially when it comes to offboarding users, offboarding also includes operations like delete. You might want to exert supervision when it's a crucial action like disable or delete, because you don't want the automation to disable or delete an active user, right? So someone is active, someone is regularly logging in. It could be a remote user or an on-site user, or if you have employees stepping into office, so it could be an on-site user. So be it any user, you don't want the automation to disturb that user's productivity, right? So my point here is every automation has to be controlled. Okay? And when you think about an automation, you should be able to write your own logic, because every organization might have different logics for onboarding, different logics for offboarding. So you should be able to write your own logic. For example, the one that you're seeing on the screen is a logic for offboarding users, okay? Or let's say for cleaning up users. So the policies for removing inactive users, okay? And the inactivity period that I am going to consider is for 180 days. So how do I do that? Now, I can write my own logic. So my logic is, when I scan my infrastructure and I find that there are users inactive, the first thing that I want to do is I want to move the users to a different organizational unit. Immediately, I want to remove them from high privilege groups. If they are members of high privilege groups, I want the groups to be removed. And the third action is I want to disable the account. but I do not want to delete the account instantly. So what I do is I create a successive task. I hope you understand the difference, right? So instant task takes place immediately. Immediate execution is instant task. Successive task waits for n number of days and then executes. Okay, so I can define the time period of execution here and then probably disable or delete the user, delete the mailbox or whatever. So let me introduce you to one concept here, which I think is really, really useful. Okay, and I hope that the solution that you are using already has this logic built in as well. The logic is, it's not a logic, it's actually a policy, delete and disable policy. Okay. Now let me tell you what this does. Let's take, for example, the disable policy. So let's say you disable a user in AD or Office 365. So when you disable an account, you might want certain actions to happen in the back end as and when you disable the account. It's not just disabling an Active Directory account and hoping that the other things will be taken care of. No, right? Because you have the user's identity in multiple technology platforms. So you'll have to have a sequence of actions taking place as soon as you disable or delete a user. So the policy is that sequence of actions that you can configure to take place after you disable or delete a user. I hope I make sense, right? So when you disable a user, if you want the home folders, if you want the profiles of the user, or you want certain other tasks to be handled, okay? So if you have something to do with the users on-prem mailbox, or you want the cloud accounts of the user to be handled, or if you don't find your requirements here, you have a custom script to run. You can even run a custom script upon disabling a user, okay? And as a best practice, when a user leaves the organization or when you disable the account, you obviously reset the user's password, right? So you can reset the user's password according to your requirement. Okay? All this can be done manually or automatically. So depending on your choice. The same holds good for deleting a user account as well. So you will be able to automate a task, be it onboarding or offboarding, but at the same time, you'll also be able to write your own logic. Okay, that's the whole point here. Now, I have been talking about automation of user onboarding, automation of user offboarding for quite some time, but let me tell you a very important point, okay? And the point that I'd like to drive home is, now you as administrators know how automation works in theory. The GIF that you're seeing on the screen, according to me, is automation in theory. You know what is automation in theory? One word is flawless. Automation in theory works flawless, okay? But we as administrators know what automation could be in reality. Okay? Now you want the automation to do something, and there are cases where the automation has done the exact opposite. It could be a human error, but the automation hasn't done it, okay? So whenever you think of onboarding or offboarding or whatever it is, when you schedule an automation, I want you or I request you to see to that the automation is controlled, okay? And how do you control an automation is the whole point. Now, the AD Manager Plus module of AD 360 not just gives you the ability to schedule an automation and to execute it at your convenience, but it also gives you the ability to, control an automation. So let's say you're trying to create a new automation for any task, be it for resetting passwords, or let's say for disabling users, okay? And who do you want to disable? Well, you can choose from one of the 200 reports that we have. So let's say inactive users. But if you enable this checkbox, which is a business workflow, what happens is the automation would just scan for the criteria that you have given, and then it would stop its function there, and it would raise a request just because this checkbox is selected. It would raise a request to whoever is concerned. Let's say it would raise a request to the line managers, to the heads of departments, or to the IT administrators. And only after you approve the automation to execute, the automation will disable users. Okay, and where you configure the business workflow, who can you add as approvers or reviewers? Well, the workflow link right here will take you directly to the workflow tab. Okay? So you have multi-level approval. A person or a machine requesting for an action, and you have a reviewer, approver, executor. Only when you have a yes from all these three levels, an action will take place. Now, if you feel that I just have 250 users to manage, I just need one level of approval, well, let's keep it simple. So you have just one level of approval. When the executor says yes to a request, the automation will take place. Okay? So the idea behind the checkbox or the workflow is to help you supervise and then execute automations. I hope I've made my point clear. Okay? Now, when you talk about onboarding users, offboarding users, or managing users for that matter, because we are talking about identities here. Identity and access management, the core part is identity management here, right? So when you talk about identity management in terms of creation, modification, or deletion, the IAM application that you use in your organization today should be capable of talking to other business applications in your office, right? For example, let's say you have an IT service management tool. Okay, Service Desk Plus is an IT service management offering for Manage Engine. So you raise request, this is for incident management, request management, and all kinds of IT service management requirements. So when a user is onboarded, okay, there is a request for account provisioning. Now, what happens here is AD Manager Plus extends its API to common business applications that you use in your organization so that the action that is initiated in that business application takes place in the technology platforms through AD Manager Plus. Now, think about a situation, okay? So let's say you have Service Desk Plus, which is the ticketing tool, okay? So your service desk technicians, they log in, okay? Instead of raising a request for actually creating a user account, they can actually initiate or trigger the process using the API directly through AD Manager Plus and have the account created in Office 365, Exchange, and AD. Okay, so this is just one example of an integration. Or in other words, if you have ServiceNow, which is another IT service management tool, your ServiceNow technicians, when they log into the ServiceNow tool, they get additional management operations. Okay, so they need not raise a request and then wait for the request to get approved and all that. You can very well talk to an IAM tool right from your business application. So be it a ticketing software or be it your people management software or whatever it is, we can extend our APIs to make the communication process a lot easier between these business applications. Okay. All right. Now, coming to the topic of delegation. Okay, so we just have two more topics to cover. One is delegation and the other one is authentication. So another 10 more minutes. Okay. Now, when you talk about delegation, the whole idea of delegation, to put it across in simple terms, is so you have one higher authority who wishes to delegate certain actions or less privileged actions to other users in the infrastructure. Okay? The whole idea of delegation is to avoid too many administrators. Okay? You don't want too many, billing admins or global admins or IT administrators or exchange administrators or server administrators, right? So you'd like to keep the process simple. The only way by which you can do this, really do this, is by following a non-intrusive delegation model. Okay. Now, there are multiple ways by which you can delegate access to other users in your infrastructure. For example, if it's Active Directory, you can add this user to the right group, or you can add this user. You can use the delegation of control wizard and then delegate access to this user on a specific OU or even groups of users. Okay. But the problem with the native delegation methodology is they are highly intrusive. Okay? And if it is not practiced in a proper manner, it's just a matter of time that the regular user becomes, or gains the privilege of that of the administrator. Now think about nested group. If you add this user to a regular group, and if that regular group is nested to a high privilege group in your AD or Exchange or whatever it is, then this regular user automatically gains the right of a high privilege user. You don't want that to happen, right? So whenever you think of delegation, let's talk about a non-intrusive delegation now. And there are certain points to be remembered, okay? So the restrictions have to be precise, be it an action-based restriction, user, group, or even attribute-based restriction. You don't want the HR to be able to see what the password is. Well, you should be able to restrict password access from the HR's view, okay? Use domain admin or billing admin or global admin only for actions that require the privilege, which means no usage of shared accounts. And when you talk about delegation, there has to be a review process in place. Who delegates what and to whom, okay? And why was a user's right revoked or granted? So you'll be able to review events, or you should be able to review events. And if it's not right, you should be able to take corrective actions. So these are some of the things that we have had in mind. And what we have done is, so inside of AD Manager Plus, we have come up with something called as task controllers. So everything here does not consider or take into consideration your native Office 365 or Active Directory privileges, okay? Everything inside of this application is a task. You can delegate a task, be it any task. You can delegate a task to the HR, the help desk technician, and or even the OU admin, okay? So the OU admin can create and modify accounts in that OU. The help desk technician can reset passwords. The HR can actually initiate the process of user creation, not just in AD, but also other platforms, okay? So what I'm about to do is I'm going to show this to you in live so we understand the concept of non-invasive delegation, okay? So please stay with me for the next couple of minutes while I demonstrate the actual process, okay? So this is the delegation tab. Now what I've done here is I have added a user. The name of the user account is HR. Let me show you the actual user, okay? So you see the HR account right here. So this HR account is just a regular account. Now what I've done here is I want this HR to be able to create accounts. Having said that, I am not willing to add this user to a special group, or I'm not going to give this user any explicit rights by altering the ACLs or adding ACEs. I'm not going to do that. Now, how do you make the HR create accounts in a non-intrusive manner? Well, that is when you add this user as a technician to AD Manager Plus. Okay. Now, what I've done here is I've already added the technician as a part of AD Manager Plus. Now, when you edit the technician, you have something to look here. So I have added the technician. I have given the technician the right to create accounts in multiple OUs. This can even be for Office 365 accounts. And I have actually given this HR a role, okay? And the role is the HR-user creation role. And just because this is a user creation, there has to be a template in place, right? Because a user might have 50 to 100 properties, depending on how many platforms that you're going to provision the account for in, okay? So you don't want the HR to be able to see everything. So you might want to use a template, but you have 100 templates. How are you going to assign one specific template and not allow the HR to jump to a different template while creating accounts? Well, if you go to the assign template section, you get to see all the templates that you have, and you can simply select the one that you wish to delegate. And how do you prevent the HR from jumping or even seeing all these templates? Well, select the checkbox which says set as default template, which means when the HR logs into the portal, they will only be able to see the template that you have delegated, okay? So let me quickly do this. So what I'm about to do now is I have now logged in as the administrator. You see this? That's why I get access to all the features of this application. Now, I'm going to sign out. Now what I'm about to do is I'm going to log in as the HR, and I'm going to show you something here. Okay, so let's see whether this delegation has any effect on the HR account, right? So this is a domain authentication, so I'll have to select the right domain. So the right domain is going to be, oops. So let's do it once again. All right. Okay. I have now logged in as the HR, and as soon as we log in, you'll be able to see that the HR does not have access to any other fields except for the one that was enabled in the role, and that is for creating an account. Okay, so let's say the HR is now going to onboard a user, onboard an IT user. Let's see how this onboarding process works in live. Okay, so the HR's layout is very simple. It is a simple form with just the first name, last name, and the title. And the title is made mandatory, so the HR will not be able to skip the provisioning process without, but by leaving the title empty. Okay, even if the HR tries to select a different template of all the templates, of all the 50 templates that we have, no other templates get listed for the HR. Okay, so if let's say the HR is now going to create a technician's account. So the first name is US and the last name is IT Tech, and the title is going to be, well, it's going to be IT Technician, right? So it's going to be IT Technician. Remember, I told you the template works on a trigger condition, and in this case, the trigger condition is the title, which we have set it to mandatory. So which means based on the title that the HR selects, the user account will be created in that department with the right properties. I'm going to show this to you live. So I hit create. Okay, it says successfully created the user. The HR doesn't even know the password or anything of that sort. All HR knows is the account has been successfully created, right? And the account is created in the Australia OU because I have multiple sites. So let's go to the Australia OU and check whether we have the account right, US IT Tech there, okay? So I go to the Australia OU here and I see US IT Tech, and I open up the properties of the user. I see all the properties are there, including the group membership of the user. Okay, the exchange mailbox for the user is created, and you have the right license mapped. So the user is now onboarded. Okay, all the HR had to do was to just type in the first name, last name, and select the trigger attribute, which is the title, and initiate the user creation process. Now, if you are wondering, is there an audit trail of the action that was just performed by the HR? The answer is yes. So I'm going to log in as the admin again. Okay, and we are trying to audit the action done by the HR now. So let's see whether AD Manager Plus captures the action and gives you enough insights. Right? I'll log into the tool. So now, while we wait for this, I would like to know if you're using an identity and access management tool already in your organization. If yes, I would like to know the name of the tool as well, if that's something that you can reveal. So I kindly request you to make use of the chat box and then send me the name of the tool that you're already using. Okay, it could be from a different vendor altogether. It need not be from Manage Engine. So just let me know if at all you're using a tool for your identity access and management purposes. Okay, so when I actually log into the tool, so let me do this again. I'm facing some issues. Oops. All right. So let's do this again. All right, let's not wait for this. So the whole idea is the application has an audit trail of the actions performed by your technicians. You might have one technician or you might have 50 technicians, it doesn't matter. So, all right, so the application is up. So if I go to the delegation tab, I see that the HR is added here and I want to know what the HR has done. So I go to the audit report section, right? Now I try to see the actions done by the HR. So the US IT Tech account was created and the creation time is right here. And the HR has tried creating the account and the action is a success. And if you want to know the properties of the account, US IT Tech, the account that was created, when you hit details, you get the properties right there. Okay. So this is one aspect of you know, one aspect of identity management. So you create an account, you modify an account, you even delete an account with a uniform process in place. And at the same time, you also delegate actions to other users in your infrastructure without actually delegating native rights, be it in Office 365 or Active Directory. Okay, but you still get them to do tasks. And I've shown you, and I showed you one example of user onboarding. Okay, now let's now switch gears and talk about authentication for about 5 minutes. Right now, authentication has always been a challenging topic and interesting for me, challenging for the administrators. Okay, because we know that old habits seldom done. So no matter how no matter how powerful your firewalls are, you have state-of-the-art IPS, IDS in your infrastructure, you have virus scanners and all that. If you don't have the basics right, none of the other things matter. Okay, so when I talk about authentication, this statement always comes to my mind: a chain is as strong as the weakest link. Okay, now that we are talking about IT security, authentication is part of IT security. So when we talk about the weakest link in IT security, you know the answer. Okay, we know that people are the weakest link when it comes to computer security. It's not from me, but it's from Kevin Mitnick. Okay, and you know who Kevin Mitnick is. Okay, so you might have state-of-the-art technology in your infrastructure. Okay? You keep updating processes, you keep patching them and all that. But if you don't pay close attention to the weakest link, well, that decides the strength of your chain. Okay? So where do we begin with? I understand that we are now talking about password-less authentication. You have various other authentication techniques, but it's always good to take a look at the basics. Okay. Now, one last question that I would like to ask you is, how many of you listening to this session are still using a password-based authentication? So if you're still using passwords to log in, I would like to see a few yeses. Okay. So depending on that, I will be able to paste the upcoming topics. Okay, right, 5, 9, right. So lots of yeses. So which means even though we're talking about authentication in the year 2021, people are still using passwords, and passwords are here to stay, whether we like it or not. Okay, so password-less authentication is something that is getting traction in the market, but still passwords are here to stay. Now, one thing that we have to remember is, all of you know this, but I'd like to keep it really, really simple. Whenever we set passwords, there has to be just two things in mind. The password has to be hard to brute force, and it should not fall under a common dictionary attack. Now, you can think about another 10 factors to actually set passwords. Okay, that is okay when you are trying to set your personal password, but when you are the administrator of an organization, okay, you cannot think of a complex password policy that is too hard for your users to adopt. Okay, so you'll have to keep it really simple, and at the same time not compromising security. So it should be hard to brute force, and at the same time it should not fall under common dictionary attack. Okay. But even before talking about setting up an organizational password policy, we need to understand what are the native requirements. When I say native requirements, I'm referring to native technology platforms like Active Directory, Microsoft 365, Sky for Business, Microsoft Teams, and all that. Because you have different credentials for all these platforms, and all these platforms have multiple password policy requirements. We'll have to understand at least some of them, okay, and come up with a password policy that meets the requirement of all of these different technology platforms. So what you're seeing on the screen is a Windows password policy snapshot. We know this, right? Of course, the values vary, but we know the parameters. The parameters are the same. Right? Maximum password age, minimum password length, password policy complexity requirements, and all that. And passwords are always stored in reversible encryption. You know the whole story. I'm not diving into details because we've been doing this for years now. Now, let's say you were using your on-prem Active Directory password policy and you were happy, and all of a sudden in 2011 we have Office 365. Now with Office 365, the same company, Microsoft, introduced, or they took a different approach when it came to password policy. So the on-prem password policy that you see here is going to be pretty different from the the Microsoft 365 password policy recommendation from the same company. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the glaring ones. Let's go to point number 3 here. The point number 3 says don't require mandatory password resets for user accounts. Whereas when it came to your Windows password policy, the password was good for, let's say, 45 days or 40 days or 60 days. Now after that, your password expired, right? Now with Office 365, Microsoft says, and this is not just from me, I have given the link right here. Microsoft says, don't require mandatory password resets, okay? But one good thing is, I see that Microsoft also tells you that banning common passwords to keep the most vulnerable passwords out of your system. And another good thing that I see is Microsoft tells you to enable MFA, multi-factor authentication. And not just simple MFA, risk-based MFA, which is good. Okay? Now tell me, how are we going to strike the right balance between these two password policies? One for Microsoft 365 and the other one for your on-prem infrastructure. Okay, so what I've done here is I have now put together a few pointers for you that will help you achieve this right balance. That's the whole idea of the session of the next 5 minutes. Okay. The first thing that we'll have to keep in mind is when setting a password policy for your organization, let's be it for 50 employees or 50,000 employees, one thing that we'll have to have in mind is point number 1. Administrators should find the right balance between user convenience and password security. Number 2, you'll have to implement multi-factor authentication whenever or wherever possible. Number 3, you'll have to establish a secure single sign-on operation. Okay, let me repeat, a secure single sign-on operation. Number 4 is you'll have to enable controlled password synchronization. Okay, so you'll have to have a way by which you allow all these 4, or these 4 are to be part of your checklists when it comes to setting up an organizational-wide password policy. Okay. Now, 8360 can help you with that as well. I told you 8360 has multiple modules, and one module is called AD Self-Service Plus. And AD Self-Service Plus is here to help you with all your authentication and authorization problems. Okay. Let me make it really, really simple for you. The first thing that I would like to discuss about is role-based password policy. I'm going to use the application real quick. So let me log into the application. By the way, this is a demo version that I'm using. So if you go to demo.adselfserviceplus.com, you'll be able to play the application right now. Okay. So if you want to play with the application, if you want to explore some of the features for like 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is, please feel free to use the demo version. Okay. All right. So let me explain some of the core concepts, and then let Harish take his turn of the session. The first point that I would like to introduce you to is, now this AD self-service policy, I mean AD self-service application or the AD self-service module of AD 360 has something called as password policy enforcer. Okay, and this enforcer, and by the way, this has nothing to do with your on-prem Active Directory, your Azure Active Directory, or your Microsoft Teams password policy or Exchange, nothing of that sort. Okay. Now, this is an additional layer that sits on top of your existing policy. So whatever is your existing policy, this is here to strengthen it and not weaken your existing password policy. So don't think about any GPO changes or any complex conditions. No, this is just a mechanism to improve the authentication process of your users, okay? Or to make the authentication process a lot more stronger. So we have 4 types of restrictions for authentication here. Restriction based on characters, restrictions based on repetition of characters, or repetition of even passwords, okay? Even pattern-based repetition, okay? If you are like me, sorry to say that, if you're like me and you have the habit of using 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the end of your password, and you don't want that to be allowed, well, you can restrict that pattern, or you can even import a dictionary to avoid common dictionary attacks. Restriction based on length, okay? Now, this is one password policy enforcer, and not all your users will have to have the same policy, okay? Because you have users belonging to IT, you have your HR, you have contract employees. Now, that's when you have a policy inside of AD Self-Service Plus that you can create and map to users based on their job roles, okay? So you can maybe create one policy for the IT administrators, another policy for the HR, another policy for your contract employees, and then link it to their OUs or groups, okay, based on all kinds of conditions. And the second topic that I would like to discuss with you is, the first topic is all about, restricting the first level of authentication, which is password. So how secure can you make the user's password? Now, when I asked you a question, how many of you are using passwords still? Almost 80% of you said, yes, we are still using passwords, which means we have taken care of the first level, which through the password policy enforcer, okay? Now, Microsoft recommends you to use multi-factor authentication whenever possible, and that's the second level, okay? Now, talking about multi-factor authentication, we have at least 17 different techniques for multi-factor authentication that you can pick and choose from that suits your requirement, okay? It can be a simple question and answer, okay? It can be an email verification. It can be an SMS verification. It can be Google Authenticator, and you can pick and choose from the available 17 different authenticators, okay? And then decide where you are going to use these techniques, okay? Now, are you going to use multi-factor authentication when your users are resetting their password or unlocking the account? Or are you even going to use it for logins, okay, when the users log in, not just into the application, but also to the endpoints, okay? Or are you going to use this while users log into the VPN? I understand that at least half of you are still working from home, which means you have VPN. You have to VPN to your corporate network. Okay, if you have zero trust, that's perfectly fine. But I understand that some of you still use VPN to authenticate. So if you want to apply MFA to VPN logins, yes, we'll be able to do that as well. Okay. Now, the application covers your first level of, this is the first level of defense. So strengthening your password is the first level of defense, and applying a good and adaptive MFA is the second level of defense, okay? And added to that, we also have conditional access, and the conditional access is pretty simple, okay? Now, you can allow certain IPs to access the portal, login, or you can restrict the access based on IP, based on device, based on business hours, and based on location, okay? So you get to define not just multi-factor authentication, you get to enforce an adaptive multi-factor authentication technique to your users, not just to your top level users, but even to an employee who was onboarded yesterday. Okay, that's the whole idea, covering almost all the employees in your organization, irrespective of the job role that they are in. Okay, and the third point, and the final point of my session is I'm here to talk about not just about authentication, but also I'm here to talk about enabling single sign-on, enabling a secure single sign-on process. Okay. Now, if you take a look at the screen for a quick second, okay, you might see that we have close to 120 applications here that most of the organizations use regularly. Okay. Be it Teams or be it Microsoft 365 or GoToMeeting or whatever it is. So you can enable single sign-on to any one of these applications and even to your custom application through AD Self-Service Plus. So what do we achieve here is, the first thing that we achieve is role-based password policy. And the second thing that we achieve is adapt to multi-factor authentication. And the third thing that we achieve is a secure single sign-on process. Okay, we're not talking about showing or listing all these 100 applications that you have in your organization to all your users without any security. We are talking about policy-based access. Okay, so based on the job role, you can probably assign different applications to your users, and the access to those cloud applications can be accompanied with a secure two-factor authentication if you want. Okay, so think about any authentication restriction that you would want to impose on your on-prem or your cloud applications or to your cloud applications. AD Self-Service Plus is here to cater to that need of yours. Okay, so we've discussed about two modules here in this session. One is AD Manager and the other one is AD Self-Service. So both the modules are part of a larger suite called AD 360. I know that I have a lot of questions to answer, so I'm going to close the session right now. Just a quick wrap up of the things that we saw, right? So we discussed about two core topics here, management and authentication, right? And we also discussed about how do you enforce a strong password policy, how do you enable or how do you enforce adapt to MFA and all that. Now with that, the IAM session comes to an end.